anything is actually being done is something else. So in terms of medicine, obviously there's a lot of waste. I guess it's kind of need versus resources again, because obviously we need to use the plastics within that industry, but I guess as long as there's research going on, perhaps we could start using more like environmentally friendly, reusable plastics, that sort of thing.
Hello, my name's Rachel. I work for University Safety Services, and my prime role is to look after all the COVID data and information that comes into the university with regards to positive cases through staff and students. I also have the task of distributing LFT test kits to staff and students, and we're here on a safety day today to try and raise awareness. I really am concerned about our environment at the moment, and a keynote on this is the actual waste that's coming out of test kits that are going to landfill and unfortunately contributing to the negative impact of our environment. With regards to the environment as a whole, I would love to see more people planting more plants, planting more trees, and stop the devastation of the rainforests. I'm quite getting on a bit now. I'm in my 50s, and I remember when I was a small child, the devastation then, which seems to have increased, and people talk the talk, but they don't seem to do anything positive about it. So I think the more awareness, the more education in schools, colleges, universities about our environment will help us to make a big difference.
I know environmental impact is one of the greatest issues facing our world today, and there needs to be more evidence and more research done, and the film can help spread awareness on environmental concerns to people.
And I know that environmental concerns are very multifaceted, so even things like fast fashion or like the types of plastics that we use in food can affect like the earth.
We both study psychology here.
Yeah, there's actually a discipline called environmental psychology that examines why people engage in certain behaviors. So when it comes to environmental psychology, for example, one thing that we would study theoretically is like how can we frame messages that motivate people to do things like recycle or to engage in more like sustainable behaviors.
I guess the problem is that we're just using too much and polluting too much, and it's getting worse faster than we can make it better. Things like air travel, cars, meat consumption. There's like so many things that contribute that we are really dependent on at the moment that just aren't sustainable for much longer.
I think sort of films as media type is still relevant today, and I think like for sort of festivals like this, although maybe they start off somewhat niche, I still think it's a very good way to sort of build awareness, especially like through the use of like effective cinematography and sort of like interactive and like good-looking sort of media. It sort of not only builds repertoire for some sort of a movement like this, it also
with UEA's GRTA project meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. This project was designed to draw upon transdisciplinary expertise across the University of East Anglia, involving researchers from the sciences, from the arts, humanities, working together and with overseas partner universities, NGOs and industry to develop innovative solutions as well as tools for subprojects tackling health, education, environmental and nutritional issues in developing countries. So in keeping with this, today's event has also been structured into 4 main sub-project sections. Firstly, I'll be explaining and reflecting upon my role within this project. Then we'll move on to focus on each of the 4 sub-projects. After which there'll be a chance to ask questions. Asha Mins will then offer some closing comments at the very end, and that'll be followed by a reception out in the foyer. When you leave the building at the end, the main front doors, I've been told to tell you, will be closed, so could you exit the building through one of the 2 side doors, which are at either end of the main foyer? That would be great, thank you. And also at this point, I should tell you that this is a hybrid event in the sense that it is being live streamed and recorded, so it's available for those who can't be present today. And finally, I should explain that given the technical complexities of this event, we won't be using any illustration slides, but we will be screening a selection of short films or clips taken from longer films in each of the sections. So the Meeting the Sustainable Development Goals project began in October 2019 and was originally planned to continue through to March 2021. However, in the spring of 2020, life threw all of us a curveball in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so our wonderful administrative team organised for extensions through to the end of March 2020 to enable the completion of planned research and translation outputs. In moving forward with this project, we certainly faced many difficulties. But I think it's testament to the unwavering passion and perseverance of each sub-project team that so many wonderful developments have been achieved. In this sense, I'd like this event to mark a celebration of some of these achievements at the same time as it's working, I hope, to showcase the utility and potential of using short films in academic projects of this sort. Although each of the sub-projects concentrated on specific issues in different countries, one of the things that they had in common was an interest in using short films to support and enhance various forms of impact. Across all the sub-projects, the films made have been and continue to be used in a lot of different settings. They've been used in various efforts to empower local communities, to support both local and international training and educational programs, to increase awareness and promote debate, to make research accessible to various stakeholders, and to stimulate conversation with policymakers. And as one of 7 main UEA investigators on this project, I was working across 3 out of 4 of the sub-projects, and part of my chosen remit was to utilise and develop the power of short documentary filmmaking for educational, communicational and advocacy purposes in association with the Sustainable Food Systems sub-project, Microplastics and Child Malnutrition sub-projects. So along with my research assistant, Alex Smith, who will be joining us in the Q&A later on, we produced in total 15 short films of varying length and type. And you'll be seeing a very small selection of these films today, as well as clips from some of the films that were produced locally in association with the Family Literacy sub-project. You'll also be seeing a number of pre-recorded interviews with overseas partners, which were kindly organised and edited by Natasha Cordeau. In terms of the academic filmmaking that Alex and I were undertaking, at the start of the project, we were able to shoot 5 short films before the pandemic lockdown made travel impossible and filming far more difficult. So depending on the project and the nature of each film, I set in place a number of different strategies to enable our work to continue. For instance, in capturing vital overseas film footage, we were able to collaborate with overseas partners and local volunteers, some of whom we'd already trained in India and Malaysia to obtain footage for some of the films. We also turned to using more animation than we'd originally planned to either frame the partners' film footage or to illustrate in animation something we originally were going to film. In addition, when it came to making a film for the Child Malnutrition sub-project, we were working with Professor Jean McNeill. Jean was originally going to write a script for this particular film, but she was forced to rethink these plans and instead organise the filming of interviews with overseas partners using an innovative method of remote self-filming with mobile phones and video calls. While I contracted local videographers in each country to capture film footage to support this material. So our plans had to change dramatically and drastically throughout the pandemic period. All in all, the process of making these films was complicated, but these processes did enable the continuation of the project for us. And as you've been listening to me talk for a little while now, this might be a good point to show you one of the films. This is a very short promotional film, primarily designed to use on social media platforms. This provides an example, a short example of a film that was constructed during lockdowns, using footage that we'd managed to capture ourselves, as well as various bits of footage that we'd acquired from project partners. So if we could play that, please. Some of these films. I want to return to reflect on the collaborative nature of the filmmaking that we undertook. I think one of the major benefits of incorporating filmmaking in transdisciplinary projects like this is that it can be used to build bridges between local communities, academics, and stakeholders. As Barbash and Taylor remind us in their book on cross-cultural filmmaking, and I quote, "Documentary filmmaking is by nature collaborative. Quite simply, it's impossible to make a film about other people completely on your own." So there's a sense in which documentary filmmaking is inherently a collaborative process, which arguably makes it a good vehicle to encourage cooperation across disciplinary boundaries and beyond. However, this bridge building that was especially evident in the making of the two participatory films that were undertaken as part of the Sustainable Food Systems subproject. For this subproject, I wanted to employ an integrated approach, one that would make the best use of creative filmmaking processes for the local populations. I was always also concerned with building a sustainable legacy for the filmmaking part of this project. So with this in mind, I decided to run training sessions for local youth volunteers in both Odisha and Bihar in India that would lead up to the making of two participatory films, one from each group. Of course, the two films I was planning would likely live on as accessible outputs on various websites. But I was also keen to use part of this project to enable some of our overseas partners and local participants to go on to make their own films. So what is participatory filmmaking? Well, in very broad terms, you could say it's defined by an approach that seeks to make films with people rather than about people. The idea being that the collaborative process of creating a film can help to build confidence and self-esteem, and that it can give the disenfranchised or marginalised a voice by providing them with a potentially powerful means of communication. For our participatory films, I was working with the project partners Pradhan, an NGO in India, and the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences in India. After some pre-planning with these partners, Alex and I travelled to India and spent 3.5 weeks there, during which time we shot footage for 4 short documentary films and also carried out 2 separate 2-day training sessions, filmmaking training sessions. And with the help of local translators, I led training sessions focused on various aspects of short documentary filmmaking for beginners, and Alex led a hands-on session in technical skills for using the GoPro filming kits that I put together, which were given to each of the partners. These are tiny little kits. I mean, everything they needed to make a film is in that little case. So we could take several of them with us quite happily in our suitcases going over to India. It wasn't a problem. And they shoot the GoPro kits. They're not cheap, but they shoot very good 4K quality film. So they're ideal for our purposes. The formal and technical sections of the training were then followed by filming practice and feedback sessions and by storyboarding exercises, which were focused on planning for their participatory film. We couldn't stay to oversee their filming, so we relied on local facilitators who had the job of collecting the footage from participants and sending this to us online for editing. And while I don't have time to play through complete films, I thought it would be useful for you to see an opening prologue sequence. This was placed at the beginning of each of the participatory films because I felt it was important to foreground the process for the viewer. Thank you. Could we have the prologue sequence? It's basically the one that you tried to put on earlier. Thank you. It's lovely to see that, see them all out there practicing with the cameras. I was absolutely thrilled with what the participants were able to achieve after, 2-day training session. And the idea that they should carry on to make their own films really took off. We sent further training materials on basic editing later that year, and with the help of the enthusiastic Pradam partners, a group of trainees from the local Lahanti Youth Club have gone on to produce dozens of short documentary films of their own, many of which have been uploaded to their own YouTube site. Also, with the help of the skilled facilitators from the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, tribal youth volunteers from the Odisha region have been able to make around 15 films of their own. And both of these groups entered films for the Table to Farm Youth Video Challenge held in conjunction with the United Nations Food Systems Summit. So this strand of the project has been tremendously successful, and I learned a lot from undertaking these participatory films. For instance, although pre-planning is important in the production of most films, in participatory filmmaking, there's a need to retain a good degree of flexibility. Of course, the need for a flexible approach became increasingly important as we continued to work within the confines of the pandemic, not only on the participatory films, but on all the subsequent film outputs. So I was able to apply some of the lessons learned from the participatory filmmaking process to the film work for both the child malnutrition and microplastic subprojects. Although the collective processes set up in response to the pandemic were obviously not the same as working in person with local participants from marginalised communities, this has undoubtedly brought home to me the collaborative nature of documentary filmmaking on a number of different levels. So I'd love to tell you more, but it's important now that you hear from the sub-project PIs and overseas partners. However, I hope what I've said gives you some kind of sense of how some of these films were made, often under very difficult circumstances, and also signals the further promise and potential of including filmmaking in future transdisciplinary academic projects. Thank you. Would our first speaker?
Afternoon, everybody. So my name is Sheng Qi, and I'm a professor in pharmaceutical material science and technology from the School of Pharmacy at UEA. So I'm the PI of the Child Malnutrition Project. So I totally agree what Christine has said in terms of impact a short film could do for academic project. For our project is more scientific, so I'll be talking about mainly our experience as typical scientists of the whole experience of how filmmaking gives us. And I have to say, as a group of typical scientists, we have all our partners from all different countries. They are all scientists. It's a very unusual experience, and when I say typical scientists, that means we are the type of people who spend most of our time in the lab, and we aim and or dream to publish in famous journals like Nature and Science. But this project, this GRTA project, is very different. So we actually set ourselves an ambition to solve a real world problem. So child malnutrition, which is silent but extremely urgent and devastating problem for many developing countries, which are many of them are our partners. To deliver the project, because it's not science, pure science-based, but it's a technology transfer-based, you are aiming to really deliver a real product at the end. It's tough for just a peaceful time. To do it through the COVID global pandemic, as well as with one of our team are fighting against cancer. I say that's very remarkable and memorable. So in terms of what we really learned from the filmmaking, I think it really gave us, our team of scientists, time to reflect and reinforce to ourselves why we're doing the project. It also gave us the opportunity, which is kind of things we don't think too much when we're doing pure science in the lab, is to really dive in deeper into thinking the multifactorial and sociological reasons of this terrible inequality and humanity crisis, which is really impact on a lot of children's health and development. And it's still happening in the 21st century. It also gave us some time to do this self-discovery process of looking back our own personal journey and struggle of being a scientist. And I think it does give the project a platform to really celebrate what we have achieved through the difficult time. So finally, I just want to thank our partners, thank Christine, Jane and Alex. They're extremely skillful storytelling to transform our project into this film. And thank the RAIN team, and they have been extremely supportive. Don't know what we could do without them. So thank you everybody for listening. Can we please play the pre-recorded comments from the partners? Yeah.
Responsible for children malnutrition project from GRTA in Brazil. Before talking about our work here, it's very important to explain the Brazilian situation. We can say that Brazil is the land of contrasts. It means that we have in the same country very rich people. However, on the other hand, we have very poor people, in most cases facing malnutrition. So the GRTA project is very important to help people in this difficult situation. And as part of this effort, we've developed this oral special tablet, just called ODT, containing the main nutrients. These tablets are very easy to administrate and it has a very pleasant taste. We believe that it will help many children in Brazil in their fight against malnutrition and in favor of their best development.
Hello there, my name is Prof Nitya. I oversee the GRTA in Thailand. Let me tell you what we have achieved here. My team has run the survey for over 200 children and found that gummy is the most preferable snack in children. Then my team developed the prototype gummy with essential vitamin and mineral additive. Before we run a test, we asked the consent from their parents. Then we found that strawberry flavor is the most popular one among our products. We finalized the recipe and registered the product name as Gum with Plus strawberry flavor with Thai FDA. Due to the challenging time during COVID-19 pandemic, we neither can organize the technology transfer to the new startup nor organize a workshop in the school. We decide to create the online web learning about our product that everyone can access and adopt the knowledge from this project to create their own product.
Hello. Our project in Jordan worked to develop a supplement that can combat deficiencies of vitamin D and iron in Jordanian populations. While the focus of the project is on children, making sure that deficiencies are corrected benefits all age groups. With funding from the government of the United Kingdom, project partners have developed a new formula for a supplement that can be taken easily by children. The project is based on international collaboration and knowledge sharing, and the supplement has been produced using local knowledge, technologies, and manufacturing, keeping its cost down and making it more environmentally sustainable. Thank you.
Since independence, the rate of undernourished or hunger in Malaysia have improved over the years. However, stunting and underweight were reported to increase in 2006 for children below 5. The crisis of obesity, diabetes, non-communicable disease have been the threat for productivity and quality of life in our society. Parents in the low-income household may use their limited incomes to obtain energy-dense and high-calorie food that lead to obesity but inadequate in macro and micronutrients. Study has shown that this occurs particularly to the indigenous community in Malaysia. The country's nutritional program policy have been evolved to deal with these challenges. School feeding programs, good eating habits, webinar has been implemented. Supplementation was also introduced in cases require special attention. So along with the international collaboration of Children Malnutrition Project under the lead of University of East Anglia UK, our team in Malaysia has developed a multivitamin friendly to children even to those under 5. We use an innovative dosage form which is oral dispersible film manufactured using an electrospinning manufacturing method. We have successfully formulated an instantly dissolvable thin film which dissolve and solve the difficulty in swallowing among the children. This product is prepared from a local ingredient of red palm oil which acts as a source of provitamin A to support the sustainable of local economies. So on top of that, it also contains vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc as an important micronutrients and trace element for children growth. This initiative has led to innovation in pharmaceutical dosage form for the ease of children or pediatric consumptions. It has also promoted the use of local ingredients which sustain and support our local economy. And most importantly, it has impacted our community of malnutrition positively.
My name is Roberto.
Every country in the world is facing one or more than one form of undernutrition in their population. Women, infants, and children are particularly vulnerable to undernutrition. The latest data from WHO, in 2020, globally, we still have over 150 million children under 5 are stunting. This means their development in height are much lower than where they should be. This could have severe impact on their later life development. My name is Sheng Qi, so I work at the School of Pharmacy at the University of East Anglia. I'm a pharmaceutical scientist. I'm very passionate about developing technology and translating technology which can meet the unmet need clinically for patients. In September 2019, my colleagues and I were lucky enough to secure a Global Challenges Research Fund translational project, GRTA for short. The overall project is called Meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, and my own sub-project is centered on tackling child malnutrition. This project is focused on developing affordable and tailored for children supplements to tackle child malnutrition issues. Once we identify the region within the world are in need of such low-cost, affordable children nutritional supplements, we were out looking for partners. And what I realized is actually many of my past PhD students are scattered within this region. As an example, Champ graduated with his PhD a few years ago. He returned to his homeland, Thailand, and Champ now is working as a lecturer in Chiang Mai University. Sam graduated with her PhD many years ago. Sam came to UK for her PhD with her government scholarship. Once she finished her PhD, she returned to Malaysia to carry out being a leading scientist there. Also working on the project is Sam's colleague, Geeta, whose research is mainly focused on the identification of childhood nutrition and the impacts of undernourishment on childhood development. In Jordan, we have Lorena and Alberto. They both were PhD students when I was lecturing at the start of my career. And they are now working in Jordan as a leading academic scientist, and they're working very closely with the regional pharmaceutical industry.
Hello, I'm AnnaRobinson-Pant, and I'm going to be talking to you about the family literacy films. I'm a professor in education and also UNESCO Chair in Adult Literacy and Learning for Social Transformation. And this is a partnership which was actually instrumental in developing this family literacy initiative. Just to sort of set the context of this project, family literacy in the global south and in the countries where we're working, which is Ethiopia, Malawi, Nepal, and the Philippines, has been very dominated by approaches from the global north, particularly from the UK and the US. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with family literacy here in the UK, but it often involves parents and children coming into very formal spaces like school classrooms, sitting in a reading corner, or possibly libraries and having book bags. And we were aware that these kind of approaches were being transferred to the context that I was just mentioning. Ethiopia, for example, was having family literacy programs where in small villages, parents were being asked to come into classrooms and help with the children's reading. So our teams in the partner universities, when we met up at a UNESCO Chair Day in Ethiopia, actually predating this project, expressed their kind of, concern and bewilderment about the approaches to family literacy that were being used in the global south, and saying, can't we have some sort of project that challenges these approaches and looks at what the ways in which people are already interacting around literacies and learning in their own context, in their own everyday lives. So this is where our starting point was. The project was using ethnographic research to explore the ways in which parents, children, other people within the community were getting together, learning skills for livelihoods, sometimes literacies and numeracies, and the ways in which they shared skills, knowledges, languages indigenously. And this became the basis through this project for activities with policymakers and practitioners, so that we could develop new approaches to adult literacy. So this is very much about challenging what we call a deficit approach to literacy and learning, about assuming that there are skills and knowledge that people have to learn that they don't already have. And the focus of this is actually suggesting, let's look at what people already do, how they learn, how they're sharing knowledge within these communities, and see how we can build on this. Why we had a film element within our project was really because we were doing ethnographic research, and our teams also were quite amazed at what they were learning around their own communities. These are people from within the countries, within some of these communities, but they had never looked very closely at, for example, how do you weave a mat, and the different kind of numerical things that people are going through in order to weave a mat, until they sat down and spent many hours talking to people as they were weaving mats or doing fishing, as you'll see in some of the films. And what we realized was that we needed to bring this kind of first-hand knowledge and observation to policymakers in each country, because there was an assumption that policymakers already knew what was going on. So I think what we saw, the purpose of these films really, was about bringing that first-hand experience of observing, learning, and Indigenous knowledge and communication around literacy too, to policymakers as a basis for discussion as to how to develop a new approach to family literacy. So how we're using these films, or how the teams are using them in the various countries, have been very much for workshops, policy workshops with national policy makers. I've just come back from Nepal, where we were using them at provincial level as a basis, a stimulus for discussion. So these are very much sort of putting some of the findings and ideas and conversations out there for people to interact around. And it's not just literacy policy makers, but also literacy trainers and facilitators. So these films are being used in the training programs organised by governments and NGOs. And just to explain also that we're using them with participants themselves, and I think we had some nice stories from Malawi when they did screenings in the actual communities where these were filmed, that people themselves realised kind of how much knowledge and understanding they had themselves. Often it's not until we explain to an outsider how we do something that we realise, you know, that that's actually knowledge and learning and something that's really valued. So you'll notice, firstly, that these films are not in English. I'm going to show you two clips, one from the Philippines, which was filmed by the University of Santo Tomas TV department, and the other one is from Malawi, which is filmed again by their university TV department. We made the decision to use local resources for these films, partly so that our teams could interact very intensively with their own TV departments. And we were lucky that 3 of the universities had TV and film departments. In fact, Nepal, the Tribhuvan University, the National University, doesn't. But the team has used the film that was made by a local company to raise awareness within the university. And when I was there, the VC was saying, yes, we need to set up a TV department like your other 3 universities. So that's a great kind of development there. So the films that you're going to see, the Philippines one is in Tagalog, and the Malawian one is in Chichewa, which Kate here will be able to understand. And we have put English subtitles for the purpose of this event. So just before we get on to that, I'd like to acknowledge all of our teams in the different countries. Unfortunately, because of the time slot, we have not been able to show the Ethiopia or Nepal films, but they're really interesting in terms of a comparison with these. Ethiopia looked particularly at traditional church education, so they're very different kind of focus. The 2 that you're going to see now, the Philippines is looking very much at agricultural livelihoods and the kind of learning going on within cooperatives.
In Malawi, you will see an excerpt of a discussion with a fisherman about how he mends his nets. Of course, I would like to acknowledge our amazing RIN team here, who have given a lot of practical support and editing support and gone very much beyond the call of duty. So thank you very much. Okay.
In the community of Barangay Pinili, a place in Nueva Ecija, Philippines, some of the indigenous practices can still be observed among the families. As one of the community members, Everlito or Glenn is one of those who have been exposed to this practice, and this is where he shares his knowledge about buro making or pickled fish.
Ako po si Everlito Pacanya, 47 years old, taga Barangay Pinili. Ang trabaho ko po ay farmer lang po. Ay, sa bukid lang po, sir. Po ng kalabaw. Kung ang bakante naman po ako, sumasama po ako dati sa rice mill. Walang masyadong trabaho sa bukid. Tungkol sa buro, kung sa kita, okay naman po sa kita. Kaya lang, talagang tiyaga lang po basta-bastang ginagawa po dahil, kumbaga, masisira po. Ay, nagturo po sa akin na yung gumawa ng buro, yung amain ko po, kapatid mo ng mother ko. At then, nagpunta po ako ng Isabela, nabuburi din po yung auntie ko na yun. Kung mga father side naman, siya ganun din po sinabi sa akin, buburi dahil nakita ko lang po kung paano siya gumawa noon at sinasabi po niya.
In another area in the community, we meet Ate Zen. She focuses on raising native chickens and harvesting egg for the farming organization that she heads. With a chicken coop in her vacant land, she can share with her husband some chores, such as harvesting the egg and cleaning them. She reveals that she also uses vinegar in cleaning the egg to ensure that the dirt will fully be removed from the eggshell.
Ako po si Ginang Sinaida Espiritu, 64 years old na sa March 20. Ako po ay nakatira dito sa Zone 2, Pinili, San Jose City. Ang anak ko po ay 5. Kami po ay magsasaka. Konting bukid lang po sa amin po to. Hindi yun po ang parang hindi namin gaanong na-train kung paano ang kita, kung kikita ba o palugi. Ngayon sa egg na lang po kami kumikita.
Pamene amayi amakhala otangwanika ndi ntchito yolukamikeka, abambo ambiri amatangwanika ndi usodzi. Bambo Mirambo Juwaweyi amudzi mwa Mbalame, mfumu yaikulu Makanjira, ndi mmodzi mwa asodzi kuderali, ndipo amachita usodzi wa matchera. Usodzi umenewu umafunika ndi nzeru komanso luso lapadera. Monga taonera mu ntchito zina zija, usodzi saphunzirira pa khomo, koma ku nyanja kupatula kukonza ndi kusoka matchera. Ajuwaweyi anaphunzira zonsezi mopatsirana kuchokera kwa makolo awo.
Chinthu cha ine nchiona kuti pa nthawi imene ndi wang'ono eti amene mabumbu anga ankagwira ntchito iyi. Ndeyo anaona kuti pali chinthu cha nzeru kuti mpukise mwana uyu ntchito kuti kuyambira mmene make ine nkazakula. Kuti mwina iye akazakhaso mwina mibanja azakhale kodalira.
Asodzi ambiri makamaka osodza ndi makombe amalembedwa ntchito ndi eni makombe, pomwe ena kwenikweni amatchera monga bambo Juwaweyi amagwira ntchito iyi paokha.
Abambo anga ine anatithandizira njira zambiri. Iwo ndithuthana ndi makombe awo ndefa amatitenga anangatabayamikira. Tikati kusoka timasoka chonchi takhanyaka tatenga ni ishi twene ishi. Tambalalani ndi amatitambalala kupanga chonchi. Nimene pajili apo kupanga chonchi. Mavona pamene kweti ndedu pamene kupanga pika. Ndama tuza makombe kuti muzajerere. Kuti muzakhala nthawi yayitali osagula wena. Chifukwa ina amatheka makombe apanga bwinobwino somba akapama kukwasirira makombe akutha. Ndi akangokutha makombe kuti iweso wata. Popeza ndalama iwepa kusowa. Ukapoka mwina usakeso ndalama upiteso kusalima ukagule makombe. Nje choncho anaona munthu wa bombaje kuti choncho ndiye kuti sibwino mmata zinthu ziti zabwino. Ndiye makombe akang'ambika muzikagula ulusi nenela muja uwu muzika kula usi ndiye muzika soka mmene muja mwangambika muja.
Informal learning that was going on, and for us it was interesting. It wasn't just about skills, but as you saw with the fishermen, it's about values and attitudes that and the ways that they're being conveyed. And I think we just have 2 interviews now with the leads of our teams in Nepal, Kamal Devkota, and in the Philippines, Gina Longtok, talking about the value of these films to them. Thank you.
I'm Kamal Raj Devkota from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. As you know, I work at the Research Center. This is Research Center for Educational Innovation and Development. It is in Kathmandu, and it especially works in the area of education, literacy, language education policies, and I'm working as one among the researchers of Nepal team. Capturing the essence of our research, we actually carried out filmmaking in 3 different sites so that international communities will be familiar with the learning practices of Nepal, learning traditions of Nepal. This filmmaking process will add value to our research. We can have bigger audience. We have very wonderful perspective behind developing this film. For example, policy makers, they have been working with the communities, yet they still haven't incorporated the communities, families, and their practices in intergenerational learning. And these, let's say, important domains of learning, important domains of literacy. We want to appeal policy makers to see this and to, let's say, to develop policies and programs so that these knowledge, these indigenous practices and these traditional practices can be used even in the field of adult literacy, intergenerational learning, and lifelong learning. They are now defining in their policy.
I am Gina Longtok from the College of Education of the University of Santo Tomas in Manila, Philippines. So I am the country project lead of GRTA projects. So that these are the family literacy projects under the UNESCO chair in adult literacy and learning for social transformation. So since we are documenting real life events, filmmaking really gives life to our research, as the visuals, narratives, and sounds make our research more interesting and more engaging. I realized that the process of filmmaking is in itself a form of research. It involves systematic and creative process of choosing the focus of each scene. It requires a careful selection of subjects and angles that would best capture the significant findings of our research. In order to do this, we need to conduct another layer of research for the documentary that we are producing. So the history of the place, the right people to be interviewed, the significant locations, all these elements, we consider them. Whenever we use our documentaries in events such as meetings and conferences, people use words such as motivating, enlightening, captivating, and powerful. And I think these words describe best what our research projects and project outputs hope to achieve. We may not be able to change the world through our documentaries, but they have the power to ignite insights into social realities that would eventually compel people to change the world.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon everybody, and good day to you if you're streaming online. My name's Andrew Mays. I'm Associate Professor in the School of Chemistry here at UEA, and my research interest is in plastic waste and microplastics, which is clearly a big theme which is resonating all around the world, and it's a particularly huge problem in the global south and particularly in Southeast Asian countries, and that is really the focus of the project we've been working on as part of this large project. So I'm going to start, Christine in fact has already given you a little introductory flavour of my research by showing the promotional film she made for me a little while ago. But what I thought I'd do is just start off by showing you the end film that Christine made for us. And it's quite a short film, so we're going to see it in its entirety, I think. And then I'll say a few words after that. So if we could have the film, please. Hello, my name is Andrew Mays and I run the Microplastics Research Group here in the School of Chemistry at the University of East Anglia. I'd now like to hand you over to my animated self, who's going to lead you through our Global Challenges Research project. We'll start by looking at the special analytical method we've developed for measuring microplastics. To analyse microplastics, we first need to isolate them from our samples. If the sample is a solid, like sand or sediment, we use a special extractor to float the plastic particles to the surface of a dense salt solution. If the sample is a water sample, it can be directly filtered. Once the particles are on the filter, it is stained with a dye called Nile red. Nile red sticks to the surface of the particles and makes them glow yellow, orange or red when they are illuminated with a blue light. The dyed sample is photographed on a special imaging rig, and the particles can then be counted and measured from the photographs. The vision for the Global Research Translation Award was to assemble the equipment required for our relatively low cost and rapid approach into kits, and to make these kits available to partners in Malaysia so they could use it to analyse samples locally in a simple and cost-effective way. The main hub for coordination of the project is based at the Institute of Oceanography and Environment at University Malaysia Terengganu. This is led by Professor Suhaimi Suratman. He is supported by Network Coordinator Dr. Yet Yin Hee. A second hub is located in East Malaysia at Swinburne University Sarawak, based in Kuching. This is led by Professor Moritz Muller from the Aquas Research Group. He is assisted by Dr. Changi Wong and Dr. Fadreen Jong. Despite the many problems and delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, our partners have been extremely busy developing the project in many different directions. The Malaysian teams have collaborated to establish the Malaysian Microplastics Network, MyMIP, which is being used to record events and link to groups and sources of information, such as the training videos produced at UEA. Groups have been actively engaged with the community in beach cleans, collecting waste plastics to improve the environment and raise public awareness of a major problem. Trips have been made to beaches in multiple locations where sand samples have been taken for lab analysis to establish microplastic levels and distributions. Water sampling has been undertaken in rivers and marine areas using both towed nets and bottle-based collection methods. A collaboration has been set up with the World Wildlife Fund Malaysia to collect drinking water samples from across the country to establish whether or not microplastic contamination is an issue. There have been numerous interactions with school groups to raise awareness of plastic waste and its effects on the environment. A plastic recycling and reforming facility is also being set up in Kuching to show school children how plastic can be reused to make new objects. Awareness of the problems of plastic waste and microplastics has been raised through academic talks, writing of blog and newspaper articles, creation of a special microplastics exhibit in the gallery at INOS, contributing video footage for multiple films and presentations. A stakeholders meeting to discuss development of policy around microplastics in Malaysia has also been held. This project has highlighted the benefits of international collaboration and sharing of expertise to solve global challenges. Could we also have the comment, please, from Moritz Muller's group?
My name is Moritz Müller. I'm a professor from St. Sarawak, and it's my great pleasure to share some of our experiences in the MyMIP network. So before this, we used to work a lot on rivers and coastal areas and have not really done much on plastic. But when we go out and sample, we recognize that there is a big problem on our beaches and we do see a lot of plastic pollution. So luckily, we became partners of this fantastic project, and we're then able to count microplastics thanks to the nice instrumentation that UEA provided. And with this instrumentation, we were then actually capable to go and do our own data collection. We sent our students out to go to the beaches and collect samples and analyze those samples. We engaged with the local NGOs like WWF to look at water contamination and drinking waters of the local communities. We hope that by developing scientifically based numbers and data, hopefully we can make better decisions for Malaysia and we avoid letting this small problem, the small microplastics, become a big problem for society. Besides the benefits of the scientific data, we also learned a lot about the use and the benefits of video material in our activities. So not only for outreach, but also for training students and training other stakeholders on using the methods. And it's definitely something we are going to use going forward. So we have quite a lot of engagement with local high schools and local communities, but we are going to introduce a lot more focused video material for this in the future. Thank you very much for watching.
I just wanted to reflect a moment on the training aspect of this whole thing, because using videos and as a way of demonstrating and training scientists is not something that I'd really ever considered or engaged with before this project started, but it was actually a fantastic opportunity that came about during this project, because I actually had Dr. Yet Yin He, who is the project coordinator back in Malaysia. She was in my research lab as a Global Challenges Research Fellow, so she came to UEA for 6 months, learned techniques, got trained, did some measurement work on her own samples that she'd brought from Malaysia. But her presence here coincided with the start of this, or the planning for this project. So we were able to develop a training video. And this was, I think, a very, very new experience for her, being the centre of attention and the star of the film. It was also a huge learning experience for me because I'd never done anything like this before, and you suddenly become conscious of all kinds of things around you in your environments, everything from the aircon buzz to the trucks going under the archway next to my lab, to all kinds of things that might be lying around that you suddenly didn't realise you wanted in the shot, and all kinds of things happen. And there was a huge kind of awareness-raising aspect to this, which taught me a huge amount. That video has gone on to be watched something like 3,800, 3,900 times on YouTube. And okay, that I know in viral global media terms, 3,800 is nothing, but for an incredibly niche, specialised training video about a particular small scientific technique, I think that is a testament really to the power of video to enable people from all around the world to learn and to engage and to take something away from that training and expertise that actually I was able to deliver to one individual in my lab. But in reality, it's now available worldwide for anybody to see and to benefit from. So that's been an incredible eye-opener for me. And as a result of that, we've actually gone on to make another video, which is nearing completion, all about building the actual instrumentation that has been designed and developed in my group here at UEA. And we want to make that technically, that information available to the global community so that there are as few barriers as possible to people building similar instrumentation, to using the techniques themselves in their own environments. And it's a great passion of mine to kind of try and disseminate this low-cost alternative approaches to measurement, in this case of microplastics, but it could be anything, because there is a terrible tendency that rich Western nations tend to develop very expensive, complex techniques using all the latest fancy lab instruments that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. And this kind of infrastructure simply isn't available in most of the countries that have the greatest problems with plastic waste and plastic pollution. Malaysia is a kind of test bed for us. It's quite a developed country. It's a very developed country, actually. It's got a very good university system. It has a lot of technical resource. But many of the instruments that are considered routine, essential tools in Western countries, they're not available to most of the research groups, even in Malaysia. And if you look further afield, to less developed Southeast Asian countries, they have no chance to use this kind of technology. So I think this has been a fabulous opportunity to explore how we can use some of those skills and some of the knowledge that we've developed to try and support countries to develop their own infrastructures and their own expertise so that they can address the problems in their own countries in a much more self-contained and independent way. So for me, that's what this project's been all about, and the filmmaking aspect of it has been a huge eye-opener in terms of how we can communicate that knowledge and how we can share it way beyond, any kind of physical training, actually getting people together that could take place. And in fact, obviously, because of COVID, not very much of that face-to-face physical training could actually take place. So it's a great example, really, of how you can use film and how you can use teaching and training resources to get around some of those problems of space and time and simple ability to interact. So with that, I'd like to just thank once again, particularly the admin team for this project. It was fabulous to have a professional admin team who looked after all the really difficult technical stuff so that the PIs could get on with the business of trying to move forward the actual project aims that they were working on. So many of them are here. So thank you all very much. And finally, huge thank you to Christine and Alex, who've opened my eyes to filmmaking. It's been a very interesting journey, and hopefully it will continue in various ways into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe I should first start with the thank yous to Christine and Alex, of course, and now Kamran over the last couple of days. But I think a very special thank you also to Annie, Hannah, Electra, I don't see here, and Natasha more recently from the RIN team, who really kind of gave, I think, went out of their way to facilitate this particular project on sustainable food systems. We were working with indigenous groups on the ground, and none of us were very technologically savvy at all. So I think their help and also putting together, editing, apart from the films, which I'll talk about today, a lot of blogs, pieces written by communities and written by the local NGO partners and so on, where English is obviously not the first language. Even Hindi, which is the national language of India, is not the main language, which I'll talk a little bit about. So very big thanks to all of you. So just a little bit of context about this project. I think unlike the others, we were already engaged in a 4-year research consortium project called Transforming India's Green Revolution Towards Sustainable Food Systems. And we had been doing the research, and we found a lot of research insights, but actually we realized also that there was really a problem or a dichotomy in terms of how do we know all this knowledge, we have all this knowledge, but why isn't it improving people's lives? Why are these people continuing to be very food insecure and undernourished? And we were working in some of the poorest parts of Eastern India, as Christine already said, in the states of Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, mainly with indigenous groups or tribal populations. And despite, you'll see some of the shots, they are in beautiful environments with a lot of forest, a lot of biodiversity, but they remain the nutritionally most challenged or most disadvantaged in terms of not just nutrition, but also health, education, social services, and so on within India. And we realized that one of the key issues really was the knowledge hierarchies that were in place. So there's a big gap between people like us, researchers, scientists, and actually the communities. So we collect the knowledge, do our research, but then there is no return. It doesn't really go back to the communities. We do our interpretations, write our papers, and so on. And also there is a kind of sense amongst the whole sort of policy, research, educated community, at least for India, I can say, that these indigenous people are backward, they are traditional, and as Anna said before, that they don't really have any knowledge, and we've got to teach them things. And what we did find was the problem with the food system, with the food and nutrition security, was that they were being told things by the health and nutrition service providers that, this is a balanced meal, this is what you've got to eat, and so on. But it was completely decontextualized. Those materials were not available in the local community or the local environment. So actually that's what we sought to do in terms of, we called it an acronym called CHIRAG, which is really a flame or a flame of light, knowledge, which was really standing for a creative hub for innovation, reciprocal research, and action for gender equality. That was very central to our work, to our strategy. And we had 4 components really of our GRTA project. One was setting up a creative practice hub using a range of visual mediums. So film was a very important one, but we also used theater, we used painting, we used photo voice, and so on, other kinds of oral or visual resources. The second was a mobile-based interactive voice response system. And here, this platform we developed was actually, which has not been done at all in the local indigenous languages. So we developed the content with local youth in the local indigenous languages, because many of them don't even understand the mainstream language of that locality. Forget about English. And I think this language issue really was a very important one. The third was using some of this documentation and material to develop local resources or local curriculum for both children and youth. Especially children were not in our original plan, but because of COVID, schools were closed, children were sitting at home, these young people were there. It became a felt need, it became a perceived need, and we used this medium also for education, which has also been used at other scales. So we use some of the resource material developed here, including some of the films, into this massive online open course run by the biggest open university in the world, actually, just because of the size of India. That is the Indira Gandhi National Open University, and that course was also launched last September, and we've just translated the course into Hindi, which will be launched now in July. And the fourth element was really advocacy with policymakers and so on. So I think I won't give too much of the background because Christine already spoke about the training that she and Alex did. They left, and within a week, I think the lockdowns were imposed. And this was a good thing, I think, from our perspective in the long run, because 1 week later, none of us as researchers were able to visit the field. So Christine and Alex had been there, done this fabulous training, and these young people were then left on their own to do what they wanted. And it really gave an opportunity without us guiding them, but to just film and to do many, many films. I think there are a few, 15 Christine mentioned. The other group in Pradhan, Bihar, they have done over 60 films, which they have done on their YouTube channel completely on their own. And they have done, they had a rough idea of our project was on sustainable food systems. So they've kind of documented local biodiversity plants, locally available plants. They've also documented, because we kept telling them that a food system is like from production to consumption. So they've also documented how it's collected, how it's cooked, how it's processed, and so on. So these films really performed multiple roles for them. It was responding to perceived needs. It was showcasing their own identity, their own culture. But it was also, I think, interestingly, critically reflecting on unequal social norms, particularly gender norms, because we were not there to tell them, or I was not there to, or in any of our team to tell them that, they did the screenings of these films locally, and then they asked questions. So one of the films where it's about forest, they hunt something, the boys go out, and then they cook it and they eat it in the fields. And when they shared this film with the community audience, many of the girls asked that why didn't we get to taste this thing, or why don't we get a share of this particular food? So I think it also raised for them a huge learning and also an empowering process, because it was completely based on self-reflection and taking action around it. It was not with us going and telling them what to do. So at the end of the year, when the lockdown lifted, we did do a small refresher course in terms of editing, subtitling, how do you frame the film, and so on with them. A little bit more refresher on the storyboarding, which Christine talked about. 2 of the films were selected for the UN Food System Summit Youth Challenge, and also one film of which you'll see a short screening now for the International Science Film Festival. And it was screened in 4 countries of South Asia in the last quarter of 2021. And I think many of these things has really created, for me, it has been an empowering process in the sense that not only for us as researchers and academics, but to just see, I think the biggest satisfaction for me from this project is really to see the youth completely take hold of this tool and go for it and, get represented in international places, their voice is heard. And remember, these are the very marginalized whose voice nobody takes seriously. So I think it has been a hugely empowering process apart from the research element and the research component in terms of which I'll talk a little bit more at the end in terms of a few concluding remarks. So can we have the film now, and then followed by the 2 clips from the partners, please?
लोगे ए मौल गोचा से जाई कर हम काड़ी कर आनलुनी गोटला गछरे 10 केजी लखा मौल आमे आनिछु काड़ी करे आरी सुकोछु 3 दिन गला उतारे ताके गोट जगह रे आमे जमा करिछु जमा करी करी आमे रामगिरी नै करी गोट काटा वाला रे बिक्री करछु 25 टका ला केजी आरी गाय गोरु मन के पनि देलुनी जे खाइलाइनी गाय गोरु मिसा आरी आमर जमी लोग बेकार न रो बोली करी आम जाई करी काड़ी करी आनी करी ताके बिक्री करी खाइलुनी मोर बापार जमी लोगे सकाल छोटा बेले आसलुनी मौल काढ़वा पाई आसी करी आमे दिन सारा मौल काढ़लुनी ए पतर मन सब जाको आमे अंडाइलुनी अंडाई दे करी गोटे पाखरे गादी कर दे ताके जोई लगाई करी ताके सब पड़े देलुनी आम निजे केते कष्ट करी परिश्रम करी आमे नै करी खाइलुनी सेटा हमके बेसी पैसा नहीं कम पैसा मिललानी मात्र हम ताके न छाडू बोली करी आनी करी खाइलुनी एटा मी जन्म न हेते हिनी काइसे गोचा से मोर आनी बापा एटा करलाटा बोलबे आर मुई सान रही करी मौल काढली आरी एटा आर मी विवाह हेली आर विवाह यार पोजी आर पाइली आर मुई आरी मौल काढली निसिन एटा सरे नाही बोलबे सरे नाही आर एबे आरी मोर पो पिला आरी एट काडी करी खाइबा सिना न सरे मौल के गोट बड़ोटा हांडी लगे 3 दिन बतराय बाय पानी संगे सेटा उकुले बोले आर गोट बड़ोटा चुली लगे आरी अलगा हांडी लगे नहीं करी निया लगे तार उपरे हांडी रखबाय सेटा आजाड़ी देबाय आजाड़ी करी आरी गोट हांडी अलगा करबाय अलगा करी सिटी नाला भिड़ाइबाय बहुत नाला भिड़ाइले बोले सिटी से निया लगाइले बोले से नियार हाबा हे करी से मन अलगा हेलानी पचे सेटा से मन नहीं कि आरी अलगा रेले बोले सेटा और सुराम हे करी सेटा खाइरे पी लाइनी ताके मद रांधलुनी मद रांधी करी आमे खाइलुनी आम देसिया लोग तो नाच डेगा करवा रही आमे पिया पी बेसी कोलुनी काय
International Science Film Festival, but this was another of the films made in Odisha. All our films are there on the website of the Sustainable Food Systems Project. So that one was called Food from the Forest. So if people are interested, you can have a look. Can we have the 2 interview clips, please?
So, hello all, myself Subhajit Chakravarti. From my point of view, the participatory filmmaking, that activity, energize a theme beyond language. We just orient the persons how to operate this particular whole to communicate with the larger mass. So now the tribal youths can communicate with all of us, and when they got their camera, they are collecting the information from their elders who can't communicate in Hindi or other major language, who can communicate only in Santhali, but they can prepare the things. Na? So they prepare the things, and these youths are capturing this knowledge system from them and share with us. Actually, in their culture, there are many untouched things. They have their own knowledge system, and a very few amount of it we articulate in our project. But that mass knowledge is totally untouched. So how do we touch these things? We arranged that training, that workshop with Christine, the participatory filmmaking workshop. All the Lahanti members are there, and all of them gone through the training, the storyboard preparation training specifically, how you articulate all your learnings in a video, the difference between documentary and fiction, some technical parts. So these things they discuss. Then we plan for some participatory collaborative films, and we make 3 films. Total a number of 68 films these youth club have built till now. It's a massive transformation which I feel working last 10 years with particularly that remote pocket. When they got the camera, they feel themselves confident that now I can share all of my knowledge with you. So that is a very powerful shift or powerful transformation of Chirag from my point of view. So hello all, myself Subhajit Chakravarti.
The process of participant filmmaking has added value to our research. It has given the perspective from stakeholders' view, which is important for any initiative to be effective. This has incited an immense interest on our youth to know more about their traditional and lost recipes, along with the documentation of the present scenario on food production, collection, preparation, and consumption. It also brought a lot of intergenerational learning from a community as youth volunteers initiated discussions within their community to come up with themes and storylines for the films. This has helped them to develop emotional attachment to their culture. And during the initial interactions with the youth, we could understand that there were many traditional food practices that they considered to be inferior, mostly due to ignorance on the nutrition aspects. Through this filming process, there was a positive change in the attitude of youth, and they felt a sense of pride in their traditional food culture. Once the films are edited and completed, they took time to show these films in their community. It was easier to disseminate awareness on nutrients through this visual mode among the community members and to a larger audience outside the community that can reaffirm sustainable food practices. We faced some challenges as it was difficult to access rural areas in the beginning to handhold the trainees due to COVID-19 lockdown. The training by Prof Christine and Ms. Alex in Odisha was just before COVID lockdown, and this training has helped the volunteers to come up with good quality videos on the market scenario at Koraput in lockdown during pandemic, which was edited by Prof Christine's team. A total of 15 films with a duration of 6 to 9 minutes each depending on the themes are made during the Chirag project period. We are using these films to communicate with the community for affirming their practices, policy advocacy meetings, and for academic purposes.
In our Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences deemed university in Bhubaneswar, which is an exclusive tribal education organization, has taken up this activity for graduate and postgraduate curriculum to document various traditional practices of their community. Recently, in the month of April, we had an induction meeting at KISS with an external committee for impact study of the projects implemented by KISS. And they applauded the participant filmmaking process after watching some of the films made by the local community volunteers under Chirag project. In our future research, we will definitely employ participant filming as a tool to engage with communities, as this provides an increased comfort for the participants to share their experience, and we can have an insider's perspective and authentic descriptions on any of the initiatives or any of the needs of the communities. Thank you.
Two or three quick points, I think, to conclude and to wind up this thing from what you've seen in the film and also from our two partners. That one, which I had already mentioned, I think that this, the cameras really gave them a sense of agency, a sense of voice, to be able to express and shoot what they wanted to show and what they wanted to share, rather than us going and taking from our own perspective. And I think that also gave the freedom to them to be actually able to discuss it. I mean, since they had shot it with their elders, when they had these community discussions, I think people didn't feel bad to criticize or to say this is good or that is good or this should have been made the other way. So there was a lot of commentary from the audience screenings, from the community screenings, in terms of how it could have been done, how it should have been done, and so on. So I think this whole ability to also, take criticism, to reflect, to take action. I think this is a typical Freirean, what we hope that we can do through our research in terms of participatory work. But I think that is one thing that does seem to have happened. I think the second thing which was very important, I think especially for the youth, I think more than for the women or the other adults, was that the schools particularly create a really stereotypical image of indigenous groups as backward and as only fit for manual labor. And I think this whole process of giving them a skill, giving them something which was sort of seen as to be done by educated people, actually gave them a sense of confidence, gave them a sense that they can actually transform, that they can change. And now, even though we are not there in the field, the project is over, I think these youth have been kind of the lasting, I would say the sustainable part of our project, in terms of being there with their camera, which Christine kindly left with them, but also with their mobile phones, and continuing to do this and to share it and so on. And the final point that I would like to make is about data. I think these films as data for our research. This is something which they have documented, but we have actually used this as data with nutritionists and trained nutritionists and dietitians to actually look at the film, see the whole process of preparation, what are the ingredients, and then to do a nutritive value analysis of these foods, and actually come up with sort of recipe book or meal templates which give what is the nutritive quality of the food that they are consuming, so as not to romanticize that everything that tribal people are doing is good, because after all, they are the most undernourished in India, but really to see what do they have from their local resources, what are they actually consuming, what have the political economy of it, what have they been alienated from, and actually where we need addition. So from the Shubhajit, the Santhal films, and the analysis of that has very clearly shown that their local resources can actually give all micronutrients and energy, but where it is not able to fulfill is protein. So they will continue to be protein deficient with their local diets. So this has given us a good advocacy tool through the documentation to now go to the government and ask for, eggs in midday meals or school feeding programs or whatever it is to overcome the protein deficit. So I think this filmmaking has been a very strong tool also for advocacy, apart from empowering the youth and I think all of us. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you to all the speakers. That was wonderful to see, reliving all those projects again. It was great. My helpers are bringing out some chairs now so that this can be our Q&A, as it were, so that you get a chance to ask questions of us. And while they bring them out, I think there's 6 chairs to come out. I'm going to be asking the sub-project leads to sit in the chairs, and then there's some handheld microphones that you can use. And if you want to ask a question, if you just put your hand up, and I'll guide one of the festival coordinators to you with a handheld microphone so that you can be heard, unless you think that you can shout loud enough, and then that's fine. And that's what we'll do. So thank you, we're almost there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One more. I'll sit on the strange one. Okay. Would the sub-project leads like to come up? Thanks. Oh, yeah. Thank you. We're also joined by Alex, who's mentioned throughout. This is Alex. This is the person that I did the filming with for the 3 sub-projects that I was involved with. We were what, I borrowed this term, but we were what we called the lean team, because literally it was just the 2 of us doing everything for the films. So I thought I'd explain to you, this is Alex. If you have any particularly technical questions, I would direct them to Alex.
Not too technical.
Okay. Have we got everybody? Oh, Sheng's gone. Oh, right, okay. Right. Do we have any particular questions that you would like to ask out of what we've shown you today? Yes.
To answer the other sub-projects, this question is for.
So unintended outcomes of the COVID.
Unexpected or unintended outcomes, related or not related to the pandemic.
Sorry, can I say something? So I've been advised that if you can repeat the question for the live audience, because there's no
just for our viewers at home.
So relating to the Sustainable Food Systems project, in which there were some unexpected opportunities with the Indigenous youth in creating their own films, I was interested to know if in any of the other sub-projects there were any unexpected opportunities or outcomes related or not related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. I think, I'm not quite sure in relation to the films, but certainly in relation to the project there were. We ended up having quite a focus on health literacy, health communication, because this was taking place during the pandemic. And the teams were picking up different ideas that were being discussed around the pandemic, around indigenous cures for COVID. And so we did end up having a focus which we hadn't intended at the beginning on health communication in particular and indigenous beliefs around COVID, I suppose, and disease in general. So, yeah. But this didn't really reflect in the films, which came later, actually, in our process.
Okay, just a very brief comment, maybe, from the microplastics sub-project. I think PPE became a massive issue globally, and it's something that we were able to highlight through blog posts that Hannah wrote and other things that people did within Malaysia. Malaysia, as it happens, is the world's largest producer of medical latex gloves, and obviously Southeast Asia is a manufacturing hub for most of the face masks that were worn globally throughout the pandemic. And I think it was just an opportunity really to highlight the amount of plastic that was generated by the whole pandemic situation. And it was, in some ways it's very frustrating because
it feels like the world went backwards a little bit just when it was going forwards in relation to understanding plastic waste. But of course, the health issues and the health implications had to take priority, and now it's an opportunity to use it as a lesson, I guess, because people have seen face masks blowing around everywhere. We see them floating around in river systems and so forth. So it's highlighted a problem in relation to something that was at the forefront of everybody's minds.
I think I see Sheng has just joined us. Would you like to come down? We have a chair for you.
I got the timing wrong.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you, all of you, for amazing presentations, very thought-provoking. I wanted to actually ask Sheng and Nitya a question, because I'm looking at these two different projects, both looking at nutrition, child nutrition, and struck by how different it is to look at making supplements as a focus for vitamins and so on, and then Nitya's focus on looking at what's already being done and what are the nutritional practices and knowledges and so on that are positive, as you say, and not a kind of a deficit. And it's really quite different. So I just wondered if there's conversations within the 4 different projects about that obvious connection, and whether, Sheng, there was ever any discussion of finding ways in which those vitamin deficits could be overcome by finding local practices, orange juice, or I don't know, whatever it is. I don't know your field very well, as you see. But, are there things that could be done other than a pill or a gummy, if you like, within the existing knowledge systems which Anna and Nitya were emphasizing? That's just my question. Thank you.
Yeah, should I go first? Yeah, well, so we actually have talked to some of the partner countries, so-called their FDAs. So they are under nutritional bureaus within the government, within their Ministry of Health, and they do have local policies in terms of fortified food, and they do put iodine, for example, in the salt. And the data shows it does help a little bit, but somehow there's a huge inconsistency in terms of different manufacturers are putting in what is supposed to be the standard. There's huge inconsistency in the quality of that, and that gives the result of it's still not effective enough. And but the local governments are doing huge amounts, so they're doing a lot of outreach, they're doing a lot of educational to raise the awareness. But what the things they are doing currently seems to be still not sufficient enough. So as my collaborator said in the clips, they are doing selective populations. For example, in Malaysia, in Thailand, all the pregnant women will be prescribed free for iodine tablets and folic acid tablets, but not for the rest of the populations, and the rest of the population are not being monitored unless they are carrying out certain analysis. And that's why we thought other intervention might be more efficient, as the food source, despite the government has been trying to do for 20-30 years, it still doesn't seem to be sufficient enough.
Thanks, Sam. That's a really interesting question. And I think there is, of course, this debate of, food-based versus tablets or supplementation. And I don't think it's an either or necessarily, though in a country like India, it's a raging, you have totally polarized. So there'll be one group saying just give the tablets or supplementation, and another group going for fortification or selection of varieties which are more suitable for particular, especially micronutrients. And I think with us, what did happen, Sheng is right about something like zinc or iodine and salt. I think now this is very widely prevalent, so we don't really worry about iodine deficiency because that is coming through iodized salt. But especially in these indigenous areas, I think with something like iron, which she mentioned, that the government does give iron and folic acid tablets. These are in these remote areas, either they don't reach, there's no proper storage, they're left somewhere, they get damp, people forget to eat them. There's no sort of regularity or there's no surety that you're going to eat those tablets. And I think that is why we tried out a more food-based approach, that how can we make sure that what is already something that is suitable to their tastes, preferences, their cultivation, their culture, their practices, which they're already used to, how can we just maybe incrementally shift? And that was the idea of this menu templates or the recipe books, that maybe just a little bit of lemon needs to be added or a little bit of something needs to be added to make those nutrients bioavailable. Because many of these things, there's also the other issue, of course, which is a more science genetics issue about the human body, that there is research in India that, especially with indigenous communities, if you keep on giving them iron tablets, they're not actually able to absorb. So it's just a waste. You take it in and it comes out. So you have to have those nutrients in an absorbable form for those bodies. And of course, your local foods is the best in terms of something which the body is attuned to and can absorb the nutrients from. So I think, so that was why we chose that. I think your question is an interesting one, that did Sheng and I talk about this little more? And I think partly because of COVID and not being in UEA a lot and not being on campus, actually we didn't really know what the others were doing. So that's true. I think Anna and I spoke a little because I was also involved with that. But I think that is something that in the future, probably since you've raised it, I think Sheng and I need to talk about these different approaches, because when I was also struck by the film, it was very contradictory to what I was saying, because it's like two different sides of totally different approaches. But I think thanks for raising that. It struck me as well.
Thank you very much for the films and the works you've put to get us to how you've collaborated and empowered people. I'm interested in those research works or projects that have that have worked with institutions, especially in the Global South. I want to know how you were able to manage conflicting, if there are any, institutional priorities. For instance, you might have an institution working on, say, education inequality or some on health. So how are you able to come to terms on what to work on, especially when you have projects, say, on microplastics or the child nutrition? So I want to know how you were able to manage those power dynamics or power relations. Thank you.
Well, I can try and make a small start. The whole kind of politics around the institutions and where you go with it is really, really complex. And I have to admit I was very naive, because like Sheng's project and like many of our projects, we build it based on existing relationships. So the partners we chose were people we knew who were relevant to our work areas, who we believed would add value to the project. But of course, there are also many other people within the country who maybe feel that they should have been the key partners or parts of that project. They weren't invited not because they weren't relevant or important components perhaps, but simply because we didn't know them. We didn't already have some kind of relationship with them as a starting point to build it. And I hope what we tried to do was a very was to plant a seed, if you like, to create something within the country which could then grow and blossom and expand. And the way that it grew and expanded wasn't something that I anticipated or directed. It happened because of the interactions between the people within the country.
It did lead to a couple of quite interesting situations, which maybe I won't discuss too much, but in terms of, you know, groups and internal politics. Yeah, it's something you always have to be aware of course. And ultimately, you have to rely on your local partners to manage the project in the best and most appropriate way. And I think they did a really good job, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to look at it from another perspective. I mean, what's been quite exciting with this project, I think, was that certainly our 4 partners were very different in terms of institutional priorities. And I didn't really go into it, but they were able to develop the content or the direction, if you like, of the research in a way that spoke to their institutional priorities. And this included kind of whether they were going to focus on publications or rather than workshops or whatever. There was amazing flexibility, I think, within this. And I think the exciting part for us with 4 different countries was that there is now a lot of South-South kind of interaction. This possibly relates to COVID, that partners started doing a lot more online with webinars, inviting each other to be involved in teaching certain courses around literacy and so on. So that was really amazingly exciting, and there were no tensions whatsoever. The side that I think was more problematic was bureaucratic literacies, or whatever you're going to call them. I know that our RIN team are very aware of this, that perhaps the UK university has very established processes for finance, for how we account for staff expenses in the field. And this actually took a lot of time and discussion in order, I mean, I call it decolonizing UEA's financial procedures. And I think this has been the biggest learning for me, to be honest, working with 4 different universities, countries with different administrative requirements. And it's, as Annie and the team know, it's been incredibly time consuming for our admin team, but it's something that we're passing on also to UKRI in terms of some of the challenges of managing a cross-country project like this, and how much flexibility a UK university like UEA has to adapt their accounting and audit procedures to respond to different processes in different contexts.
And just to add a very small note to this, I think especially if there is an element of empowerment or of giving voice to people who were voiceless or a marginalized group, I think the politics of it and the power relations of it become very clear, because suddenly you have a group which was completely disenfranchised now, going on YouTube, going to international festivals and so on. And I think that does create, when people express their own things, there are people obviously, and I think not so much in the local community, which was quite proud of these youth, but definitely in the government, in the bureaucracies, the people with whom we are trying to advocate, because there are advantages for the state, and this is a real-life political economy of keeping people at particular levels. So when you overcome that, or when you try to challenge that, or when you try to ask questions about COVID or about whatever it was, then it's, and when a state is not able to deliver, I think it gets uncomfortable. So I think but that was also, I think in a positive way, that was also a learning of sort of real life political economy when you're trying to create change. And I think this is what the GRTA was about. It was going beyond research to translate research into some kind of solution or some kind of activity, action on the ground. I think the minute you get into that, then you do get into a lot of power dynamics and politics at different levels.
I think we've come to the end of our time, if that's okay. Thank you for those really interesting questions.
This last question, if it's possible.
Oh, okay, we'll have one more question, and then some closing comments from Asha, and then a reception out in the foyer with wine and nibbles. So that would be very pleasant.
I have a question to Nitya ma'am. Ma'am, you mentioned about the hunting in those parts of India, right? So my question is, how frequent are those hunting? So any comment on that?
Yeah, it's not frequent. I mean, the thing is now there's some ceremonial hunting. Partly it's a policy issue because many of these forests are allowed, like you're allowed to go and collect minor forest products, but things like hunting is not necessarily allowed because they are reserved or somewhat protected forests. But the hunting is also of things which are not necessarily in the forest. I mean, in the fields, for instance, you have during the monsoon in the rice fields, you will have little snails, crabs, some small fish, or you might have in the fields in many of these areas, you know, rats or other kind of small animals, which actually they do hunt. But because there is a shame element to these foods, these are seen as very low foods or dirty foods, they don't necessarily report it. And in most diet surveys of formal nutrition surveys, you will never find reportage of some of these small animals, you know, little pigs or mice or whatever, field rats or other things will never be reported because these are seen as dirty. Similarly, the film you saw, I think the fermented rice, fermented millets, the mahuli flour, fermented, actually these are all quite nutritious foods, the fermented foods. They're not really alcohol, but some of the states, again like Bihar, has even banned these because they have banned liquor. So with all liquor ban, even some of these very nutritious fermented foods have been banned. So I think there are a lot of complexities in terms of policy and how we define foods. It's a highly political area. Thank you.
Right, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, should we maybe go there and leave the floor to Asia? No, we're not running.
Researchers and the filmmakers, but there was a load of other people involved that actually made this project work, and that works because you have professional people running a project, which then allows the creatives and the researchers to do what they do, and that's absolutely how universities should operate. I had the pleasure of watching all these films already online, and they were funny. They were moving. They offered huge insights that I wouldn't have otherwise got sitting in my laptop during the pandemic in my dining room table. So there is so much in these films that sort of goes beyond usual science communication, which usually means reading something, doesn't it? Reading something and absorbing it, and just assuming that that by doing that, that person, the audience for that piece of work, now knows what it is that researcher thinks or they found out. And so that's linear communication, just completely one-way communication, pushing stuff at people, thinking that that's the way to disseminate and communicate. These films show that science communication and research communication is far richer than some of the traditional ways of science communication. And so I applaud everybody who coordinated this project. I applaud the filmmakers. I applaud the people who led the research, and I applaud all the people who were in country making the films themselves, because I think we got far more in-depth, interesting insights than we would otherwise have got. And like I say, I found some of them quite moving. In particular, the people in India talking in the markets and things like that. You know, you wouldn't get that otherwise. So yeah, I just applaud everybody for the work they did. I think they're really interesting, very very valuable. And these things sort of not exactly come about by accident, but yeah, the funding, the GRTA made it the glue that could do this, and it was all about impact. So I've decided that we should start a sub area of research which will be research project filmmaking. So you just, you know, there's like, there's theories of documentary, there's theories of filmmaking. I'm guessing there's some media and filmmaking people here. We could actually start looking specifically at what works for research films, because I work in science communication, I'm a science communicator, so what we do is all about evidence base. We do what we know works, and we draw on all sorts of literature and research to do that. And I don't know of this in filmmaking for research. There's obviously lots of film theory, so it did make me think that might be something that some of you guys here might want to look at as you carry on in your careers as well. So well done, everybody. I don't think it could have been much better given the circumstances that everybody has talked about, and it may be even the circumstances made for better films and a much deeper and richer collaboration. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.